Zuri stood at the gate of her family house in Nairobi and felt the weight of memories rush back to her. The house was not the biggest or the fanciest, but to her it carried more value than any mansion ever could. Every brick, every wall, and even the creaking doors seemed to speak of her late father, the man who had poured his love and effort into making this house a home. It was where she had grown up, where she had learned to ride a bike in the garden, where her father would sit on the porch and tell her stories about life. Inside the living room, she could almost hear the echoes of laughter from family gathering, the smell of her father's favorite tea still lingering in her memory. The walls carried photographs of birthdays and holidays, moments that reminded her of how deeply tied she was to this place. To Zuri, the house was not just four walls. It was a living memory, a reminder of her father's presence and of the bond they shared. She often walked around the garden, touching the flowers he had planted with his own hands, and each corner felt like a piece of him was still there. Losing her father had left a hole in her heart, but this house filled part of that emptiness. It was her safe place, her inheritance of love, and the last bridge between the past she cherished and the future she faced. Baraka had always been a man of big dreams. From the moment Zuri met him, he talked about building businesses, buying properties, and living a life that looked larger than what they had. At first, she admired his ambition. It was part of what drew her to him. But over the years, she noticed that his hunger for success came with a dangerous carelessness. He would spend money they didn't really have, invest in ideas without planning, and laugh it off whenever she raised her concern. Zuri loved him, but she often felt like she was the one holding the family steady while he chased shadows. Lately, though, something about Baraka's behavior had changed. He had started whispering on the phone, lowering his voice whenever she walked into the room. He would step outside to take calls, and sometimes when she asked who it was, he gave vague answers like, "Just a friend," or "Work matters." The explanations didn't satisfy her, but he said them with such casual confidence that questioning him further often felt useless. There were nights when he didn't come home on time. Zuri would sit at the window, staring at the gate, her mind filling with questions. He would return hours later, smelling of expensive cologne, claiming he had been meeting with business partners. When she pressed him, his eyes darted away, and he brushed her off with a smile that no longer felt genuine. The warmth they once shared was slipping into cold distance, and she could feel it in her bones. Zuri wasn't the kind of woman to pry, but she knew when something wasn't right. The man she thought she knew so well was becoming a stranger in her own home. His absences, his excuses, and his sudden bursts of defensiveness painted a picture she couldn't ignore. He still spoke to her kindly in front of others, but behind closed doors, she sensed the secrets weighing on him. It was like living with a shadow, a version of Baraka she couldn't reach no matter how much she tried. She told herself to be patient, that maybe his dreams were finally leading to something good. Yet, in her heart, she feared he was hiding more than just financial struggles. Every time he avoided her eyes, every time he dismissed her questions with a joke, she felt the gap between them widen. It was not just about money anymore. It was about trust, and Zuri was starting to realize that the foundation of their marriage was beginning to crack. What hurt the most was that Baraka didn't see her worry. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. Either way, Zuri carried her suspicions quietly, unsure of what truth she might uncover if she pushed too hard. Deep down, she knew something was coming, and it would change everything. It was a bright afternoon when Zuri noticed something unusual outside the house. She had just finished watering the flowers in the garden when she caught sight of two men walking slowly around the compound. They weren't neighbors she recognized, and the way they looked at the house made her uneasy. One of them pointed at the walls, the other gestured toward the garden, and they spoke in low voices as if they were inspecting something important. Zuri stood still for a moment, watching them with narrowed eyes, her heart beating faster. This wasn't the casual visit of a friend. This felt different. She wiped her hands on her dress and walked closer, pretending to be calm, though her mind was racing. The strangers smiled politely when they saw her, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Before she could ask what they were doing there, Baraka suddenly appeared, all cheerful and welcoming. He shook their hands, laughed loudly, and acted as though everything was perfectly normal. When Zuri asked who they were, he brushed it off with his usual charm. "Just friends," he said quickly. "They came to admire the house." The explanation didn't sit right with her. She had lived in that house all her life, and no one had ever come just to admire it. Strangers didn't wander around a private compound, pointing at walls and measuring spaces with their eyes, unless there was more to it. Zuri kept quiet, but her suspicion grew stronger. As the men walked around with Baraka, she noticed the way they nodded seriously, like people discussing business. One of them even bent down to check the base of the fence, tapping it with his shoe. Zuri's stomach tightened. These weren't friends. They looked more like buyers or inspectors. After a while, the visitors left, and Baraka came back inside as though nothing unusual had happened. He kissed Zuri on the cheek and told her not to worry, but his voice was too light, too rehearsed. Zuri didn't push further. She had learned that pressing him only led to vague answers or irritation. Instead, she filed the moment in her mind, knowing she would come back to it later. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake off the image of those men walking around her father's garden. She remembered how her father had planted those trees with his own hands, how he had built the fence to protect their home. The thought of strangers sizing up the property felt like a violation. Her instincts told her that Baraka's friends weren't there by accident, and if she didn't stay alert, she might lose more than just her peace of mind. For the first time, Zuri felt the house was in danger, not from outsiders, but from the man who shared her bed. A few days after the strangers had visited, Zuri couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The unease that had been gnawing at her wouldn't let her rest. One evening, when Baraka was out running what he said were business errands, she found herself standing in front of his desk, hesitant but drawn by a need she couldn't explain. The drawer he always kept locked and off-limits caught her eye. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it open, expecting maybe old bills or papers she didn't need to worry about. What she found made her heart skip a beat. Hidden at the bottom of the drawer were documents she had never seen before, sale agreements, contracts, and papers that looked official. She picked them up carefully, her eyes scanning the lines, and her stomach dropped. The signatures didn't look right. Some of them were forged. And then she saw it. The house, her family home, was already listed for sale. Without her knowledge, without her consent, Baraka had taken steps to sell the one place that held every memory of her father, every corner of her childhood, every secret garden of her heart. Her hands shook as she read through the documents again and again, as if reading them aloud could make the nightmare disappear. She remembered her father, the late nights they had spent in the living room, the laughter, the stories, the small rituals that made this house hers. How could he? How could someone she loved betray her in a way so deep, so personal? She checked the dates, the signatures, even the small notes on the margins. Each one confirmed what she had feared. Baraka had planned this quietly, probably for weeks, maybe months. He had smiled at her at dinner, kissed her on the cheek, and all the while he was plotting to sell the home she treasured more than anything. The anger, disbelief, and heartbreak collided inside her. She felt a cold emptiness, a betrayal that cut sharper than she had ever imagined. For a long moment, Zuri just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the papers, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what had been done. The house wasn't just bricks and walls. It was a repository of love, of family, of history. And now it was in danger of slipping away because of lies and deceit. Then, as the initial shock began to fade, clarity set in. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she could take control. Her mind raced with possibilities, legal steps, ways to protect her home, ways to confront Baraka without giving away that she knew. For the first time, Zuri felt a spark of determination ignite inside her. The house would not be lost, not if she had anything to say about it. She folded the papers carefully, hiding them where Baraka wouldn't think to look, and a quiet resolve settled over her. This was far from over. After discovering the hidden documents, Zuri felt a storm of emotions, anger, hurt, and disbelief. But she knew she couldn't let Baraka see even a hint of her. He continued his routine, smiling at her, asking about her day, acting as if nothing was wrong. Every time he mentioned the house or money, she nodded along, pretending to trust him completely, even as her mind raced with suspicion. She became a master of casual glances, of neutral expressions, of saying the right things without revealing anything. Inside, though, she was calculating her next move. Zuri spent days pretending everything was normal. She laughed at his jokes, shared small talks over dinner, and even asked him questions about work with genuine curiosity. Baraka, unaware that she knew about the documents, seemed to relax, letting his guard down. It was strange, feeling this mix of closeness and distance at the same time, like living with a stranger while watching him unravel himself slowly. Every lie he told, every excuse he gave, fueled Zuri's quiet determination. She couldn't confront him yet. She needed evidence, she needed support, and most of all, she needed a plan that would protect the home her father had left her. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Zuri pulled out her phone and contacted her lawyer. She explained the situation in careful detail, sending photos of the forged documents and describing Baraka's suspicious behavior. Her lawyer listened, asked questions, and assured her that there were legal steps she could take to stop any sale. Relief mixed with resolve. She now had a plan. The law was on her side, and all she needed was patience and timing. While pretending ignorance in the daylight, Zuri spent her evenings researching, learning the process of reversing unauthorized sales, understanding her rights as a co-owner, and figuring out the loopholes Baraka might have overlooked. Every piece of knowledge strengthened her confidence. She realized that Baraka had underestimated her. not just as his wife, but as someone who knew the value of what she had inherited and was willing to fight for it. The most difficult part was keeping calm around him. Every time he bragged about future plans, Zuri smiled and nodded, all while thinking, "You're not getting away with this." She learned to hide her frustration, to mask her fear, and to project normalcy. To the outside world, everything seemed ordinary, but inside, Zuri was a storm of strategy and vigilance. By pretending ignorance, she gained control without confrontation. She had created a quiet shield around herself in the house, buying time while she set the pieces in motion. And as she lay in bed each night, she promised herself one thing. Baraka might try to play games, but Zuri would win, and she would make sure the home her father loved remained hers. The first move had been made, and now the game was hers to play. The day of the meeting arrived, and Zuri felt a strange mix of anxiety and quiet confidence. She had rehearsed every scenario in her mind, but nothing could prepare her for the tension of sitting in the same room as Baraka, pretending to be unaware while knowing exactly what he had been planning. Baraka, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to her knowledge. He strutted into the lawyer's office with a wide grin, his chest puffed out as if he had already won. "This old house is finally off my hands," he bragged loudly, leaning back in his chair and looking around for validation. He spoke as though the home, the memories, the family legacy, were nothing more than a burden he had been eager to dump. Zuri forced a neutral smile, listening quietly, her heart beating fast but her mind sharp and steady. Every boast, every smug remark he made, only strengthened her resolve to stop him. Then the door opened and the buyer walked in. Zuri's eyes widened slightly, and she felt a flicker of surprise she could barely contain. It was Amani, her childhood friend, the girl who had shared so many of her early memories, running through the garden, climbing trees, laughing under the sun. Only now, Amani carried herself with the confidence of a successful businesswoman. Her presence filled the room with a quiet authority that immediately shifted the balance. Baraka's smile faltered for the briefest moment as he shook her hand. "Ah, nice to meet you," he said, his voice a little too loud, trying to mask a hint of nervousness. He hadn't expected this. Zuri felt a quiet satisfaction, a small surge of victory she didn't dare show. Amani had changed, yes, but the bond of their past, the trust, the shared history, made her feel like an ally Zuri could count on. Amani's eyes met Zuri's, and a small, knowing smile passed between them. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but it said more than words ever could. Zuri realized she was not alone in this. The woman standing before her was not just a business partner in this transaction. She was someone who would understand the importance of the house, someone who would honor the memories it held. Baraka, still trying to recover his confidence, pulled out documents and began to explain the terms of the sale. But every word he said felt heavier now, his bravado fading in the face of Amani's calm presence. Zuri's heart lifted. The situation had shifted entirely. What had started as a trap set by Baraka now had the potential to turn in her favor. As the meeting began in earnest, Zuri felt a renewed strength. The house, her memories, her father's legacy, it wasn't over. Not yet. And with Amani in the room, she knew the tide was finally turning. Baraka might have plotted the sale, but Zuri now had an unexpected ally, and the game was about to change completely. The lawyer's office was quiet, filled with the low hum of air conditioning and the faint shuffle of papers. Baraka had spread the contracts across the table, looking pleased with himself, convinced that the deal was about to be finalized. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, and began talking about the sale, outlining the terms as if victory were already his. Zuri sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, hiding the tight grip she had on her emotions. Then Amani spoke. Her voice was calm but firm, and it carried a weight that made even Baraka pause. "Before we proceed," she said, "I want both legal owners to be present. I can't finalize anything without proof that this sale is legitimate." The room went still. Baraka's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. He opened his mouth, but no words came out immediately. Zuri felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her chair. Her hand went into her bag, and then she pulled out the original title deed. The paper felt heavy in her fingers, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. The proof that the house belonged to her, that every memory, every corner of the garden, every brick her father had laid, was legally hers. She laid the deed on the table, sliding it toward the lawyer. Her eyes met Baraka's, steady and unflinching. For the first time, she saw the shock register on his face. The confident, smug man who had thought he could manipulate everything was suddenly reduced to silence. The lawyer picked up the deed, examining it carefully, comparing it with the sale documents Baraka had prepared. Amani gave Zuri a small nod, a silent gesture of support and understanding. It was like the room itself recognized that the power had shifted. Baraka tried to speak again, trying to explain, to argue, but his words sounded weak, unsure, and hollow against the solid proof Zuri had presented. The deed didn't lie, it didn't waver. It was her father's gift, her inheritance, and the law was on her side. Zuri stayed calm, letting Baraka fumble. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to plead. The papers spoke for her. Every line, every signature on the deed was a testament to the truth, and now the truth had cornered Baraka completely. He had acted as if the house was his to sell, but the evidence told a different story, a story of betrayal, deception, and a husband who had overstepped his bounds. As the lawyer nodded and began explaining the legal consequences of attempting to sell property without consent, Zuri felt a quiet satisfaction. She had played her part, held her patience, and now the game was over. The house, her memories, her father's legacy, they were safe. All she had to do was let the law confirm what she already knew. No one could take this from her. For the first time that day, Zuri allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The tables had turned, and she had won, not with anger, but with patience, strategy, and the undeniable power of truth. The room was tense, filled with the quiet rustle of papers and the low murmur of voices. Lawyers, witnesses, and Amani all leaned in as the discussion over the house sale began in earnest. Baraka sat at the head of the table, still trying to project confidence, but the faint tremor in his hands betrayed him. He glanced at Zuri, attempting a reassuring smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He had no idea that the moment of reckoning was just seconds away. The lawyer picked up the original title deed Zuri had presented and held it next to the forged sale documents Baraka had prepared. He spoke clearly, his voice steady, so there was no room for misunderstanding. "These sale agreements," he said, pointing at the papers, "bear signatures that are not legally valid. The property in question is legally owned by Ms. Zuri, as proven by this deed." Baraka's face went pale. For the first time, his carefully constructed confidence cracked. He opened his mouth to speak, to argue, but the words stuck somewhere in his throat. The witnesses exchanged glances, the lawyers nodded, and Amani leaned forward slightly, her expression calm but firm. The reality hit hard. He had tried to sell a house that was never his to sell. Fraud, the lawyer continued, voice firm. Attempting to sell property without the legal owner's consent is a serious offense. These documents cannot be enforced. Any action to transfer ownership based on them is void. Every word felt like a hammer striking Baraka's deception, exposing it fully for the room to see. Zuri watched quietly, her hands folded, though inside she felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. The betrayal she had sensed for months, the secret dealings and whispered phone calls, had finally been laid bare. The man she had trusted, the man who had shared her life, was now unmasked in front of everyone. Baraka's attempts to explain himself grew desperate. He stammered, tried to point at Amani or even the witnesses, but no one was buying it. His lies and charm were useless now. Every eye in the room saw what Zuri had known all along. The laughter, the small talk, the late-night excuses. Everything was revealed in the harsh light of truth. Amani finally spoke, her voice even but pointed. "Ms. Zuri is the rightful owner. Any attempt to sell this property without her consent is invalid. The house remains hers, fully and legally." Her words echoed in the room, leaving no room for argument. Baraka sank back into his chair, drained, colorless, powerless. Zuri felt a calm wash over her. The house, her father's legacy, her memories were safe. The room had witnessed justice, not only legal but moral, unfolding before their eyes. And for the first time in months, Zuri allowed herself to breathe fully, knowing that the man who had betrayed her could no longer threaten what was hers. The exposure was complete, public, and undeniable. Baraka's fraud had been revealed, and Zuri stood quietly, strong and composed, as the truth finally took its place where it belonged. After Baraka's fraud was exposed, the mood around the family was electric with shock and whispers. Relatives who had once supported him, who had admired his ambition and laughed at his jokes, suddenly turned their eyes away. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others muttered under their breath. The confidence Baraka had carried for years crumbled in front of everyone, replaced by shame and confusion. He sat quietly, unable to meet anyone's gaze, his usual charm gone, leaving only a hollow silence. Zuri, on the other hand, felt a strange calm. The anger that had simmered inside her transformed into clarity and purpose. She stood and began to speak, her voice steady, strong, and unafraid. She reminded everyone of the house's history, how her father had built it with his own hands, how every corner carried memories, laughter, and love. She spoke about the countless hours her father had spent tending the garden, fixing the walls, and filling the house with warmth. Her words painted a picture of a home that was far more than just property. It was a symbol of family, love, and legacy. Then she addressed the legal side. She explained her father's will and how it clearly named her as the rightful owner. She showed the documents, the deeds, the evidence of Baraka's attempted fraud, and spoke about the seriousness of trying to sell a house that was never his to sell. Relatives listened, some with wide eyes, some shaking their heads, realizing for the first time the extent of Baraka's deception. Baraka tried to defend himself, stammering and pointing fingers, but no one listened. His excuses sounded weak, transparent, and desperate. The laughter and support he had once enjoyed evaporated in the face of truth. He was alone, with no ally willing to defend him. Every word Zuri spoke reminded the room that his power had been built on lies, and now those lies were fully exposed. What surprised everyone was Zuri's poise. Even in the midst of betrayal and the betrayal of trust, she stood tall, confident, and articulate. She didn't shout or accuse. She told the truth clearly and calmly. Her relatives, who had once blindly supported Baraka, now saw her as the rightful heir not just of the house but of respect and integrity. By the end of the gathering, Baraka's disgrace was complete. The smug, confident man who had thought he could manipulate everyone was left powerless and alone. Zuri had reclaimed not only her home, but also the respect and recognition she deserved. She had turned betrayal into strength and exposure into victory. The backlash was not just against Baraka. It was a celebration of Zuri's courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering loyalty to her father's legacy. For the first time, the house felt fully hers again, and she knew that no one, not even Baraka, could ever take that away. Zuri stood in the living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, and took a deep breath. The house smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood. After the ordeal with Baraka, she had spent weeks restoring every corner of the home, fixing broken doors, planting new flowers in the garden, and bringing back the warmth that had once made it a home. Each small improvement felt like reclaiming a piece of her past, a way of honoring her father and the memories he had left behind. She turned to Amani, who had been by her side through the whole ordeal. "I don't know how to thank you enough," Zuri said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. Amani smiled, placing a hand on hers. "You didn't need to do this alone," she said. "The house belongs to you, and I just helped make sure no one could take it away." With the house restored, Zuri felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The rooms were filled with light, laughter, and the faint echoes of her childhood. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a sanctuary, a place where memories and dreams could grow together. Finally, Zuri walked to the gate, standing tall with the breeze ruffling her hair. She looked out over the street, over the garden her father had planted, and over the home she had fought to protect. Her voice rang clear and unwavering. "This house will never belong to anyone else but me." For the first time in a long while, Zuri smiled without fear or hesitation. She had faced betrayal, deception, and doubt, but she had emerged victorious. The house was hers, not just legally but in heart and spirit, and she knew that its walls would continue to hold her memories and her future, safe and unshakable.